They abandoned their own daughter for one reason alone. She was not the son they wanted. At just 8 years old, she was left behind in the countryside with nothing more than a promise that her parents would return. They never did. For years, they forgot she existed. Until the son they had treasured above her gambled away the family's fortune. Suddenly, the daughter they had called a burden became their only hope. They begged her to marry one of the most powerful dukes in England to save the very family that had thrown her away. But after everything they had done, would she sacrifice her future for people who had never once chosen her? Before we continue, please don't forget to subscribe to this channel and let us know in the comments where you are watching from. Enjoy the story. England, 1816. For the first 6 years of her life, Evelyn Valehurst believed she was loved. She had no reason to think otherwise. The grand estate where she was born was all she had ever known, and every child naturally believed that home was the safest place in the world. Whenever the Earl of Valehurst, Richard Valehurst, returned from London, Evelyn would hear the sound of carriage wheels long before anyone announced his arrival. The moment the horses entered the courtyard, she would gather up her little wooden doll and run to the front steps as fast as her tiny legs could carry her. She waited with bright, hopeful eyes, longing for the one thing she treasured more than any toy, a smile from her father. Sometimes he would rest a hand on her head before walking inside. On rare occasions, he would ask whether she had behaved herself while he was away. Those brief moments were enough to fill her heart with happiness. She never realized how little they truly were. Richard did not dislike his daughter, yet there was always a distance between them, one he never seemed able to close. Deep inside, he carried the same hope that generations of noblemen before him had carried. He wanted a son, an heir who would one day inherit the title, the lands, and the centuries-old legacy of the Valehurst family. Lady Verena never tried to hide that same desire. Unlike her husband, she rarely softened her disappointment. To her, Evelyn represented what the family did not have. Every passing year without a son only strengthened her determination to produce one. Then, after 6 years of waiting, the child they had longed for finally arrived. It was a healthy baby boy. His name was Alastair. The entire estate burst into celebration. Church bells rang across the nearby village. Neighbors arrived bearing gifts wrapped in fine cloth. The Earl hosted an elaborate dinner for neighboring landowners, where crystal glasses were raised high into the air. "To the future of Valehurst," one gentleman declared with a cheerful laugh. Another raised his glass. "At last, the estate has its rightful heir." Richard smiled with unmistakable pride. "My son will restore this family's legacy." Around the room, voices echoed their congratulations. Almost no one noticed the small girl standing quietly beside her nurse. Evelyn held her wooden doll tightly against her chest, watching stranger after stranger congratulate her parents. She searched the room for her father's eyes, just once. He never looked in her direction. That evening changed something no child could yet understand. From that day forward, the difference between the two children became impossible to ignore. The best tutors were hired for Alastair before he was even old enough to appreciate their lessons. The best tailor in the county visited regularly to measure new clothes. Every birthday brought expensive gifts, while every childish mistake was dismissed with indulgent laughter. Nothing seemed too costly where the future Earl was concerned. For Evelyn, life became a series of quiet disappointments. When her dresses became too small, she was expected to make them last a little longer. When her shoes began to wear through, she gathered the courage to ask her mother if she might have a new pair. Lady Verena barely looked up. "Do you think money grows on trees?" The answer never changed. Yet that very afternoon, she spent more than twice the cost of those shoes on Alastair's latest amusement. The servants noticed. They exchanged silent glances as they carried trays through the halls. None of them dared speak. A servant's opinion carried no weight inside a noble household. Over the next 2 years, Evelyn watched her place within the family disappear piece by piece. Conversations stopped including her. Lessons became fewer. Affection became almost non-existent. It was not one cruel moment that broke her childhood. It was hundreds of little moments that slowly taught her she mattered less. By the time Evelyn reached her 8th birthday, Lady Verena had reached a decision. One evening, after studying the household accounts, she calmly closed the ledger. "We're wasting money." Richard looked up from the fire. "On what?" "Our daughter," he frowned. "What do you mean?" "She will marry one day and belong to another family. Every pound spent on her leaves this estate with her dowry. Every pound spent on Alastair remains here." Richard said nothing. Verena continued in the same measured tone. "Your brother William has no children. Send the girl to live with him. It will reduce our expenses. She will learn practical skills, and we can devote our full attention to raising our heir." Richard stared into the flames. His expression revealed hesitation. Not because he disagreed with her reasoning, because somewhere beneath years of tradition, he knew it was wrong. But knowing something is wrong and finding the courage to oppose it are rarely the same. After a long silence, he lowered his head. "If William agrees, he will," Verena replied. The matter is settled. A week later, Evelyn believed they were simply visiting her uncle in the countryside. She hugged her wooden doll throughout the journey, asking innocent questions about when they would return home. No one answered. When they reached the farmhouse, Lady Verena knelt before her daughter. For the first time in years, Evelyn thought she saw tenderness in her mother's face. Instead, Verena simply said, "Be a good girl. We'll come for you soon." Evelyn smiled and nodded. She believed every word. She stood beside Uncle William's gate and watched the family carriage disappear down the country road. She waited until sunset. She waited until morning. She waited for days. Then for weeks. Then for months. No one came. Do you believe parents should ever value a son more than a daughter simply because he will inherit the family name? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. England moved on. So did Evelyn. The little girl who had stood by the farmhouse gate clutching a wooden doll eventually stopped watching the road. There came a day when she no longer expected to hear the familiar wheels of her parents' carriage. No letter arrived. No messenger came. No birthday greetings were sent. The Earl and Countess of Valehurst had disappeared from her life as completely as though they had never existed. Uncle William never tried to replace them. He simply gave her what they never had. His time. If there was work to be done, Evelyn worked beside him. If there was a lesson to learn, he patiently explained it. He believed every piece of knowledge had value, no matter who received it. The farmhouse was nothing like the grand halls of Valehurst, but it was a place where everyone contributed. If water was needed, someone fetched it. If bread had to be baked, someone rose before dawn. If the harvest was late, everyone remained in the fields until the work was finished. Evelyn never complained. She simply learned. As the years passed, William began trusting her with responsibilities few young ladies of noble birth would ever experience. He taught her how to keep household accounts, recording every expense with neat, careful handwriting. He showed her how to calculate whether a season's harvest would carry them through winter. When traveling merchants arrived, he allowed Evelyn to stand beside him as prices were negotiated. "Never accept the first offer," William would quietly remind her. "If a man is too eager to sell, ask yourself why." She listened carefully. She watched more than she spoke. Soon she recognized the merchants who dealt honestly and those who hoped to profit from another person's inexperience. She learned that running an estate was not simply about owning land. It was about making wise decisions every single day. Clara remained as demanding as ever. She rarely offered praise. If Evelyn swept the kitchen well, Clara pointed out the corner she had missed. If supper was prepared properly, she reminded her there was always room for improvement. As a little girl, those words had strung. As a young woman, Evelyn understood something different. Clara expected excellence because she believed excuses accomplished nothing. Her lessons were seldom gentle, but they taught Evelyn resilience. Each correction made her more capable. Each responsibility made her more confident. Without ever intending to, the family who had received her as an unwanted burden had prepared her for a future no one could yet imagine. Many miles away, life at Valehurst followed a very different path. Alistair grew into exactly the sort of gentleman everyone had encouraged him to become: handsome, confident, and utterly convinced the world existed for his benefit. No one had ever denied him anything. When he made mistakes as a child, someone else corrected them. When he overspent as a young man, someone else paid the bill. Consequences were problems for other people. By the time he reached his early 20s, London knew his name far better than the tenants living on his father's lands. His days disappeared into horse races, private gaming clubs, and lavish entertainments. At first, fortune smiled upon him. Small victories convinced him he possessed remarkable luck. When that luck vanished, he refused to believe it. Each loss became another reason to wager again. Each debt became another promise that the next game would change everything. Instead, the debts grew larger. Money borrowed from one creditor paid another. When even that was no longer enough, Alistair signed agreements using parts of the Valehurst estate as security, scarcely considering the danger. Months passed before Richard discovered what his son had done. The documents lay spread across his desk. Family lands, passed down through generations, now stood at risk. Creditors were preparing legal action. Richard lowered himself heavily into his chair. "I gave him everything," he whispered. Across the room, Lady Verena stood in silence. Her expression revealed neither panic nor sorrow, only calculation. Slowly, a thought formed in her mind. She looked towards her husband. "We still have a daughter." Richard lifted his head. "Our daughter, the Duke of Ravenhurst, is searching for a suitable bride." Her voice remained as calm as if discussing the household accounts. "If Evelyn marries well, this family may yet recover." Neither of them spoke about the years they had abandoned her. Neither wondered whether she had suffered. Neither asked whether she might refuse. To them, Evelyn had never ceased being part of the family. She had simply become useful again. Not many days later, a carriage bearing the familiar Valehurst crest rolled slowly towards William's farmhouse. Evelyn recognized the crest at once. For a long moment, she simply stood and looked at it. Years earlier, she would have run forward with hope in her heart. That little girl no longer existed. William stepped outside and followed her gaze, his face hardened. "So," he said quietly, "they finally remembered." Clara came to stand beside them. She looked at Evelyn for several moments before speaking. "Do not forget who you became here." There was no warmth in her voice. There never had been, yet Evelyn understood exactly what she meant. The frightened child who had arrived years ago had long since disappeared. In her place stood a woman who had earned her strength. William rested a gentle hand upon her shoulder. "You do not owe them the person they left behind." Evelyn looked once more at the farmhouse that had become her true home. Then she drew a slow breath. Without another word, she stepped into the carriage and began the journey back to the family that had forgotten her. The journey back to Valehurst was quieter than Evelyn remembered. As a little girl, she had spent carriage rides pressing her face against the window, asking endless questions about when they would arrive home. This time, she sat with her hands folded neatly in her lap, watching the familiar countryside pass without saying a word. Nothing outside had changed. Everything inside her had. When the carriage finally rolled beneath the stone archway of the Valehurst estate, servants hurried forward to receive her. Most of the older staff recognized her immediately. Some lowered their eyes. Others offered polite bows, unsure whether they were greeting the Earl's daughter or a complete stranger. In truth, she was both. Lady Verena was waiting inside the entrance hall. She stepped forward with a measured smile that never quite reached her eyes. "You have grown into a fine young woman." Evelyn inclined her head politely. "Thank you, mother." The words felt unfamiliar, not because she had forgotten them, because she had gone so many years without needing to say them. Richard appeared a moment later. His hair had grown noticeably greyer since Evelyn had last seen him, and the confidence that once accompanied every step seemed diminished. "It is good to have you home," he said. "Home." The words settled heavily between them. Evelyn looked around the grand hall where she had spent her earliest childhood. The portraits remained upon the walls. The marble floors still reflected the afternoon light. Everything looked exactly as it had years before, yet nothing felt familiar. No one embraced her. No one apologized. No one asked how she had lived after they left her behind. Instead, Lady Verena gestured towards the drawing room. "There is something important we must discuss." Once they were seated, the Countess wasted no time. "The Duke of Ravenhurst is searching for a wife." Evelyn listened quietly. Lady Verena continued, as though discussing a business arrangement. "A marriage between our families would strengthen long-standing connections and restore stability to Valehurst." Richard shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing. Evelyn's eyes remained fixed upon her mother. "You sent for me because of this," Lady Verena answered without hesitation. "It is an excellent opportunity." "For whom?" Evelyn asked softly. Silence filled the room. Neither parent spoke. Neither denied the truth. After a long pause, Evelyn asked the question she had carried with her since the carriage had arrived at William's farmhouse. "Is this why you brought me back?" Richard lowered his gaze. Lady Verena merely folded her hands. "The past cannot be changed." It was not an answer. It was an admission. Not once did either of them apologize for abandoning an 8-year-old child. Not once did they ask whether she had forgiven them. The years she had spent waiting beside a farmhouse gate seemed to hold no importance at all. To them, only the future mattered. Evelyn looked from one parent to the other. The hurt she had carried for so many years no longer demanded tears. It had become something quieter, something stronger. "I will meet the Duke," she said. Richard looked up in surprise. "You agree? I did not say I was doing this for Valehurst." Her voice remained calm. "I am doing this because I refuse to spend the rest of my life running from the past." Lady Verena gave a small nod, apparently satisfied. The conversation was over. A few days later, Evelyn was introduced to Adrian Ravenhurst, Duke of Ravenhurst. Like every nobleman of his rank, Adrian understood that marriage carried obligations extending far beyond personal happiness. A duke married for the future of his house, for alliances, for stability. Affection, if it came at all, was simply an unexpected blessing. As he entered the drawing room, he expected to meet another fashionable young lady raised in comfort and eager to impress him. Instead, he found a woman who rose with quiet confidence and greeted him with perfect courtesy. "Your Grace." There was no nervousness in her voice, no attempt to flatter him, no carefully rehearsed performance. She simply met his eyes with calm composure. Adrian found himself unexpectedly intrigued. Their first conversation was neither long nor dramatic. He asked about her interests. She spoke thoughtfully about estate management, the importance of careful bookkeeping, and the value of understanding the people who work the land. She never boasted. She answered each question with quiet certainty born from experience rather than privilege. It was unlike any conversation Adrian had expected. When the meeting ended, he found himself reflecting upon it far longer than he intended. There was something unusual about Miss Valehurst, something genuine. Their conversations continued over the following days, always polite, always measured. Neither attempted to rush a familiarity that did not yet exist. Adrian admired her intelligence and her remarkable self-possession. Evelyn respected the quiet dignity with which he carried the immense responsibilities of his title, yet both remained careful. Adrian had long accepted that love had little place in the life of a duke. Duty came first. It always had. Evelyn understood that truth all too well. She had spent most of her life learning what happened when affection depended upon usefulness. She would not expect promises that neither of them could honestly make. When Adrian finally asked whether she would consent to becoming his wife, he did so with complete sincerity. "I cannot promise you a marriage built upon romance," he said evenly. "But I can promise respect, honesty, and every consideration due to my Duchess." Evelyn held his gaze. Respect, honesty. They were promises she valued more than beautiful words. "I accept, Your Grace." Their wedding was conducted with all the dignity expected of two great noble houses. Guests admired the elegance of the ceremony. Families exchanged formal courtesies. Vows were spoken with quiet conviction. As Evelyn left Valehurst beside her husband, she did not look back. She had already spent enough of her life, waiting for the love that House had never been willing to give. If you were in Evelyn's position, would you have refused the marriage after everything her parents had done, or would you have accepted it as she did? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Life at Ravenhurst began exactly as Evelyn had expected. Not with warmth, not with cruelty, simply with duty. The morning after their wedding, Duke Adrian Ravenhurst personally showed her through the West Wing that had been prepared for the Duchess. The rooms were elegant without being extravagant, furnished with polished oak, embroidered curtains, and shelves lined with books collected by generations of the Ravenhurst family. "I hope you will find everything satisfactory," he said. "I already do, Your Grace." He inclined his head politely. "If there is anything you require, you need only inform Mrs. Ashcombe, the housekeeper. She has served this household faithfully for many years." "Thank you." There was little else to say. He excused himself to attend to estate business, leaving Evelyn standing alone in a home that was now hers, yet still felt unfamiliar. She did not take offense. Before their marriage, Adrian had been honest with her. He had promised respect. He had never promised affection. Over the following weeks, they settled into a quiet routine. They dined together because propriety required it. Their conversations were courteous but brief. Adrian asked whether she had passed a pleasant day. Evelyn replied that she had. She asked whether estate matters were progressing well. He answered that they were. Neither ventured beyond polite conversation. When dinner ended, Adrian usually retired to his study to review correspondence or meet with his estate steward. Evelyn returned to the library or explored the vast gardens surrounding Ravenhurst. There was no hostility between them, only the careful distance of two strangers learning how to share the same life. It did not trouble Evelyn. She had spent years longing for affection from people unwilling to give it. She would not spend another lifetime chasing it. Instead, she devoted herself to understanding the estate that now depended upon her as much as it depended upon its duke. She spent her mornings walking through the household, introducing herself not as someone expecting obedience, but as someone wishing to understand how Ravenhurst functioned. She spoke with Mrs. Ashcombe in the kitchens. She greeted the stable master before the day's work began. She thanked the maids who kept the house in order. The servants were surprised. Few duchesses asked their names. Fewer still listened to their answers. Within days, Evelyn noticed small problems that had gone unquestioned for years. The dairy deliveries often arrived later than scheduled, forcing the kitchen staff to delay preparations. The laundry maids worked longer hours than necessary because supplies were stored in different parts of the house. A seamstress quietly mentioned that worn household linens were discarded when many could still be repaired. None of these problems threatened the estate. Yet together they created unnecessary expense and needless labor. Evelyn never issued grand commands. Instead, she asked gentle questions. What if the deliveries arrived an hour earlier? Would it help if the supplies were kept together? Could the linens be mended before new ones are ordered? The suggestions were practical, simple. Before long, the household began running more smoothly. Mrs. Ashcombe noticed first. "So much has improved," she remarked one afternoon to the butler. And her Grace has not once asked to be thanked. Word travelled quietly through the servants' hall. The new Duchess did not seek attention. She simply made everyone's work easier. Adrian remained unaware. His days were consumed by meetings with tenants, correspondence from London, and responsibilities that accompanied one of England's oldest dukedoms. Then, one morning, as he prepared to leave his study, his steward spoke unexpectedly. "Your Grace, yes, the household accounts have shown a noticeable reduction in unnecessary expenditure this month." Adrian looked up. "I don't recall authorizing any changes." "You did not, sir." The steward hesitated. "Her Grace observed several inefficiencies. They were sensible recommendations." Adrian said nothing. Later that afternoon, Mrs. Ashcombe made a similar observation. "The servants have taken greatly to the Duchess. They say she listens." That surprised him more than the financial savings. Adrian had known many ladies of rank, most expected admiration. Very few earned it. Over the following days, he found himself noticing things he had overlooked before. He saw Evelyn pause to help an elderly maid gather a basket of freshly folded linens after they slipped onto the corridor floor. He watched her thank the gardeners after they finished planting new rose bushes outside the conservatory. One afternoon, while crossing the courtyard, he saw several tenant children wave excitedly towards her carriage. She smiled warmly and returned the greeting before continuing her journey. None of those gestures had been performed because he was watching. In fact, she never noticed him at all. That interested him. One evening at dinner, Adrian found the silence between them less comfortable than usual. After a moment, he spoke. "I understand you've made several improvements within the household." Evelyn looked up, almost surprised the subject had arisen. "I merely noticed a few things that could be done differently. So I've been told." She smiled faintly. "I hope I have not overstepped. Quite the opposite." It was the first time since their marriage that his voice carried something warmer than simple politeness. "I am told the staff think highly of you. They have been very kind to me." Adrian regarded her thoughtfully. There was no pride in her answer, no expectation of praise. She accepted the compliment with the same quiet humility she seemed to bring to everything she did. For the first time since their wedding, he found himself wondering whether he had misjudged the woman sitting across from him. She was nothing like the sheltered noblewoman he had expected. And without either of them realizing it, the respectful distance that had defined the beginning of their marriage had taken its very first step towards something more. As the months passed, life at Ravenhurst settled into a rhythm neither Evelyn nor Adrian had expected. The quiet reserve that had marked the beginning of their marriage no longer felt uncomfortable. They had learned each other's habits without trying. Adrian now lingered a little longer at dinner instead of returning immediately to his study. Evelyn found herself looking forward to their evening conversations, whether they spoke of estate matters, books collected by Adrian's grandfather, or the tenants whose welfare concerned them both. Respect had grown naturally between them. Neither realized it was becoming something deeper. Then another letter arrived from Valehurst. The familiar seal was enough to tighten the ache Evelyn always carried in her heart. She thanked the footman, waited until she was alone, and carefully broke the wax. Her eyes moved steadily across the page. The words were exactly what she expected. Lady Verena wrote that creditors had become increasingly impatient. Certain influential gentlemen remained unwilling to extend further credit. Surely, the Duchess of Ravenhurst could persuade her husband to offer assistance. There was no greeting asking after Evelyn's health, no mention of her happiness, no apology for the years they had abandoned her, only another request. When she finished reading, Evelyn quietly folded the letter and placed it beside the others she had kept hidden inside a small writing desk. She remained sitting for several moments before drawing a slow breath and returning to her duties. She believed no one had noticed. She was mistaken. That evening, Adrian found her in the library. She stood beside the window, a book open in her hands, though her eyes had not turned a single page. He recognized the expression upon her face. It was the same expression he had seen every time another letter arrived from Valehurst. Not anger, not bitterness, something quieter, an old wound that never seemed to heal. For a moment he considered remaining silent. It would have been the easier choice. Instead, he spoke gently. "May I ask you something?" Evelyn looked up. "Of course," he hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "Every letter from your family leaves you looking as though it has taken something from you." She lowered her eyes. "I had hoped you hadn't noticed." "I notice more than you think." Silence settled between them. Adrian did not press her. He simply waited. At last, Evelyn closed the book and placed it upon the table. "You once asked me why I never seem surprised by my family's demands." He nodded. "I think." "You deserve the answer." Her voice remained calm, almost too calm, as though the memories had been carried for so many years that speaking them aloud no longer required tears. "I was 6 years old when my brother, Alistair, was born. A son, the heir my parents had always wanted." She smiled sadly. "I did not understand it then. I only knew that father stopped looking for me when he came home, and mother stopped pretending she was pleased to have a daughter." She told him about the celebrations that filled Valehurst after Alistair's birth, about standing quietly beside her nurse while guests toasted the future Earl, about clutching her little wooden doll and waiting for her father to notice she was there. He never looked back. Adrian listened without interruption. She continued. "As Alistair grew older, everything belonged to him. The finest tutors, the best horses, every opportunity. When I asked mother for a new pair of shoes, she looked at me and said." Evelyn's voice scarcely changed as she repeated the words she had never forgotten. "Do you think money grows on trees?" A few hours later, she spent twice that amount on my brother. She paused only briefly before continuing. "I was 8 when they took me to my uncle's farmhouse. They told me it was only for a short visit." A faint smile crossed her lips. "It is strange what children choose to believe." Adrian remained completely still. Evelyn looked towards the darkening sky beyond the window. "Before they left, mother knelt beside me. She said, 'Be a good girl, we'll come for you soon.'" Her voice grew quieter. I believed her. I stood outside the gate after their carriage disappeared. I waited until sunset, then until morning, then for days, then for weeks, then for months. She closed her eyes. "For only a moment. Then for years. No one came." The library fell silent. Even the crackling fire seemed distant. "I eventually stopped waiting," Evelyn said softly. "My uncle taught me how to work. Clara taught me discipline. I learned to survive without expecting anyone to choose me." She turned back towards Adrian. "I do not tell you this because I want pity. I have lived too long without it to begin asking for it now. I simply wanted you to understand why those letters still hurt." Adrian looked at the woman standing before him. For the first time, he saw not only the Duchess of Ravenhurst. He saw the lonely little girl who had stood beside a country road, believing her parents would return. He saw the young woman who had transformed abandonment into resilience. He saw someone who had every reason to become bitter, yet had instead become compassionate, wise, and quietly strong. His admiration was no longer simply admiration, without his noticing precisely when it had happened. It had become love, not because Evelyn had rescued his household, not because she carried herself with grace, not because she was his duchess. He loved her because every hardship that should have hardened her had instead revealed the remarkable strength of her character. That night, after Evelyn retired, Adrian remained alone in his study. Lady Verena's latest letter still rested upon his desk. He read it once more, then he folded it carefully. For the first time he drafted a reply himself. It was courteous, it was respectful, and it declined every request. He sealed the letter with the Ravenhurst crest. Evelyn never knew it had been written. She only noticed that for the first time since their marriage. Her mother's demands no longer seemed to reach quite as far into her new home. The arrival of the Valehurst carriage brought no sense of anticipation to Ravenhurst. Its crest was as familiar to Evelyn as it had always been. So was the feeling that accompanied it. She stood at the drawing-room window as the carriage rolled into the courtyard, her hands resting quietly before her. For a long moment, she neither moved nor spoke. She already knew why they had come. People who truly wished to see their daughter rarely waited for years. People who came only when they needed something seldom wrote before arriving. Adrian entered the room just as the footman announced their guests. He glanced towards Evelyn. "You need not receive them if you would rather not." She appreciated the offer. She truly did. But she slowly shook her head. "If I continue avoiding the past, it will always follow me." Adrian gave a single nod. "Then you will not face it alone." Together, they entered the drawing-room. Richard and Lady Verena rose as they entered. Time had changed them both. Richard appeared older than his years. The confidence that had once accompanied his title had given way to quiet exhaustion. Lady Verena remained as composed as ever. If worry weighed upon her, she refused to let it show. "Evelyn," she said with polite restraint. "It has been some time." Evelyn returned the greeting with equal courtesy. "Mother." Neither woman embraced. Neither pretended they shared the closeness expected between parent and child. Adrian welcomed them with the dignity expected of his rank before inviting everyone to be seated. The conversation lasted only moments before Lady Verena revealed its true purpose. "The situation at Valehurst has become increasingly difficult." She folded her hands neatly in her lap. "The creditors are demanding immediate settlement. Several portions of the estate may soon be lost." Richard lowered his eyes. No one spoke. Lady Verena turned her attention to Evelyn. "You understand what is at stake. Our family has protected those lands for generations." Evelyn listened without interrupting. "We believe the Duke's influence could persuade certain gentlemen to extend further consideration." Her voice remained perfectly calm. "With your encouragement, I am certain His Grace would understand the importance of assisting his wife's family." There it was. Not concerned, not regret, another request. Adrian remained silent. He wanted to hear what they would say next. Richard finally spoke. His voice carried none of the certainty it once had. "Evelyn," she looked towards him. "I failed you." The words hung heavily in the room. For a brief moment, the little girl who had once waited beside the front steps of Valehurst wanted desperately to hear what came next. Richard swallowed. "I should never have allowed you to be sent away. I should have protected you." Evelyn felt her heart tighten. At last, after all those years, he had admitted the truth. Then he lowered his head once more. "But the family needs you now." The hope disappeared as quickly as it had come. "It is only this once," Richard continued quietly. "If Adrian would help us recover, we could rebuild. I would not ask if there were another way." Evelyn looked at him without speaking. She realized something painful. Even his apology had led to the same destination. Another sacrifice, another request. Lady Verena spoke before the silence became uncomfortable. "Family comes first." The words struck Evelyn with unexpected force. Family. She remembered another day, another promise, "Be a good girl, we'll come for you soon." She had believed those words with all the innocence of an 8-year-old child. She had waited until sunset, then until morning, then for days, then for weeks, then for months, then for years. No one came. Now the same people who had forgotten her expected loyalty they had never shown her. Evelyn lowered her eyes. For the first time since returning to Valehurst months earlier, certainty abandoned her. Part of her remained the little girl who had spent years hoping her parents would choose her. Another part knew they still had not. They simply needed her once again. She opened her mouth to answer. Before a single word left her lips, Adrian quietly rose. His voice never rose. It did not need to. The Duchess of Ravenhurst will not be asked to repair mistakes she did not make. Lady Verena looked at him in disbelief. Your Grace, this is a family matter. It became my concern the day you expected my wife to bear the burden of decisions she never made. Richard looked towards Adrian. We are asking for compassion. Adrian met his gaze steadily. And my wife has shown you compassion every time she received another letter asking for help. You have asked much of her. What have you ever asked about her? Silence answered him. He continued. When your letters arrived, they spoke of debts. They spoke of creditors. They spoke of influence and money. Not once did either of you ask whether your daughter was content. Not once did you ask whether she had found happiness. Lady Verena's expression hardened. We did what every noble family must do. No, Adrian replied calmly. You did what you believed was convenient. His voice remained measured. But Evelyn will never again be treated as though her only value lies in what she can provide. Lady Verena slowly turned towards her daughter. So this is your decision. You would abandon the family that gave you your name. Evelyn looked at her mother. The accusation pierced her more deeply than she wished to admit, even now. Even after everything, some part of her still longed to hear words of love instead of blame. Instead, she heard the same judgment she had carried since childhood. She felt tears fill her eyes before she could stop them. I have spent my whole life trying not to disappoint you, she whispered. I was never enough when I was your daughter. Now I am not enough as your Duchess. Her voice trembled. No matter what I choose, I am always the one blamed. The room fell silent. No one spoke. No one moved. Only the quiet sound of Evelyn's tears filled the space between the family that had abandoned her and the man who had just made it clear that he never would. The departure of the Earl and Countess of Valehurst left an unfamiliar silence behind. No voices echoed through the drawing room. No further demands were made. Only the quiet weight of truths that could no longer be denied. Evelyn remained standing where they had left her. Adrian neither hurried her nor filled the silence with comforting words. He simply stood beside her, close enough for her to know she was no longer facing life's burdens alone. Sometimes the greatest comfort came from the quiet presence of someone who chose not to leave. Across the following weeks, news from Valehurst spread steadily through neighbouring estates. The creditors carried out the legal proceedings they had delayed for months. Large portions of the family lands were surrendered to settle outstanding debts. Generations of wealth disappeared, not through revenge, but through consequences that could no longer be postponed. Richard accepted each loss in silence. For years, he had blamed unfortunate circumstances. Now he understood the truth. His greatest failure had never been losing the estate. It had been losing his daughter long before that. More than once, he found himself remembering a little girl waiting faithfully upon the front steps whenever he returned from London. She had asked for so little, a smile, a kind word, a father's attention. He had always believed there would be another opportunity. There wasn't. Some losses could never be reclaimed. Lady Verena remained unchanged. Even after everything, she insisted she had acted as any sensible mother of a noble family would have done. The heir had to come first, she declared more than once. If difficult decisions had to be made, then they were necessary. She never admitted abandoning Evelyn had been wrong. She never accepted that a child could not measure love through practical reasoning. To the very end, she believed she had protected the future of Valehurst. She never realized that, in doing so, she had destroyed the very family she claimed to defend. Alistair faced a future unlike the one prepared for him since birth. The privileges that had shielded him for so many years had finally disappeared. For the first time in his life, there was no one left to settle his debts. No one willing to excuse another careless mistake. The life he had expected to inherit no longer existed. With little choice remaining, he accepted employment managing part of a neighbouring estate under the supervision of an experienced land agent. The work was honest. The hours were long. Every decision carried consequences he could no longer avoid. It humbled him in ways privilege never had. For the first time, Alistair began earning through effort what he had once expected through birth alone. At Ravenhurst, life continued with a quieter kind of happiness. One morning, Evelyn sent 2 letters of her own. One was addressed to William, the other to Clara. Weeks later, another carriage arrived at Ravenhurst. This one carried no painful memories. William stepped down first, smiling the moment he saw Evelyn waiting to greet them. She crossed the courtyard without hesitation and embraced him. No words were needed. Some gratitude could never be fully spoken. Clara climbed down more slowly. She looked around the grand estate before turning her attention to Evelyn. "You've done well." It was as close to praise as Clara had ever given anyone. Evelyn smiled. "I couldn't have done it without you." Clara looked almost uncomfortable. "I only taught you to work." "You taught me much more than that," Evelyn replied gently. "You taught me to endure when life was difficult." For a moment, Clara said nothing. Then she gave a small nod. It was enough. That evening, the 4 of them shared supper with Adrian. Conversation came easily. William spoke of the countryside. Clara quietly corrected one of his stories, making everyone laugh. Even Adrian smiled more openly than he once would have imagined. As Evelyn looked around the table, she understood something that had taken her years to learn. Family was not created simply through blood. It was built by those who remained beside you when they had every reason to walk away. Later that evening, she and Adrian walked through the gardens as the last light settled across the lawns of Ravenhurst. The sky glowed with the colors of another peaceful sunset. For a long while, neither of them spoke. Finally, Adrian broke the silence. "There is something I should have said long ago." Evelyn looked towards him. "When I agreed to our marriage, I believed I was doing what duty required. I intended to give you respect. I never expected anything beyond that." He paused briefly. "I was wrong." His voice remained calm, yet every word carried quiet certainty. "I did not come to love you because you improved this estate. I did not love you because you carried your title with dignity. I did not even love you because you endured hardships that would have broken many others." He gently took her hand. "I love you because you are Evelyn, the strongest woman I have ever known." For a moment, Evelyn could not speak. All her life, she had believed love was something earned by being useful, something that could be taken away the moment she disappointed someone. Standing beside Adrian, she finally understood what love truly was. It asked for nothing. It demanded nothing. It simply chose. Tears filled her eyes, but this time they carried no loneliness, only peace. Together, they stood watching the sun disappear beyond the gardens. Evelyn found herself remembering another sunset from many years before. An 8-year-old girl had stood beside a country road, waiting for a carriage she believed would return. She had waited until sunset, then until morning, then for days, then for weeks, then for months, then for years. No one came. A gentle smile touched Evelyn's face. She no longer pitied that little girl. She wished she could tell her something. One day you will stop waiting. One day someone will choose you without asking you to become someone else. One day you will finally understand what home feels like. And at last, she did. If Evelyn's journey touched your heart, tell me this in the comments. After everything Lady Verena and Earl Richard did, what do you think Evelyn should do? I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you enjoyed this story, please like, share, and subscribe for more heartfelt stories of resilience, justice, and hope.